As a reminder, all members of council are obligated to declare a conflict of interest or a pecuniary interest as per section 133 of the Lloydminster Charter regarding any item on this agenda. Not seeing any, I will ask if there is any additions or deletions for this agenda. Not seeing any, noted. I will move on to item number 3, approval of the agenda that is presented. I'll look to council for direction. Councillor Thorson.
I move that the agenda dated May 4th, 2020 be approved.
Thank you. Look to seconder, Councillor Diachuk. Thank you very much. Any further discussion before I call for the question? Not seeing any, I'll ask all those in favor to raise their hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed? Carried. Moving on to item number 4, approval of the previous meeting minutes. I will ask for direction from council. Councillor Diachuk.
I'll move that the regular council minutes dated April 20th, 2020 be approved.
Seconder, Councillor Monroe. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor, please raise your hands.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed? Carried. Moving forward to item number 5, business arising from the minutes. Is there any business at this time that needs to be noted in the minutes, from the minutes? Not seeing any, I will move on to item number 6, which is new business, 6.1. I'll look to the city manager.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. For item 6.1.1, the Lloydminster and District Health Advisory Committee appointment, I'll be presenting that today. The recommendation is that council approve the appointment of the mayor of the city of Lloydminster to the Lloydminster and District Health Advisory Committee for a 2-year term from April 2020 to April 2022. There's a bit of a change in that from the package that was sent out, and we removed Mayor Gerald Albers to just say the mayor of the city of Lloydminster, and the purpose for that is should at any time we have a new mayor in the future, that the mayor would always be appointed to this committee and we don't have to reappoint after every election. So that would be the intent of this. The issue is that board member Wendy Plandowski has resigned from the Lloydminster District Health Advisory Committee, leaving a position open to the board. The Lloydminster District Health Advisory Committee is recommending that the mayor be appointed to the committee for a 2-year term. Administration is currently in the process of reviewing the procedure and developing a policy on board appointments. Past practice has been for the city to appoint members to some external committees, even though there's no legislative requirement to do so. Wendy Plandowski was nominated and accepted a position on a provincial health advisory council, which is a significant commitment and makes it difficult for her to provide the local board with her fullest intention. The city of Lloydminster thanks Wendy for her hard work on the committee and for her ongoing commitment to our community through her representation on the Provincial Health Advisory Council. Current appointments to the board by the city of Lloydminster are Jonathan Thorson, Stephanie Brown Monroe, and Paul Richer. And it's important to note that both Councillor Thorson and Councillor Brown Monroe have been appointed as members of the community, not as elected officials. The mayoral appointment is bound to the mayor's position, not the individual. Therefore, whomever presides as mayor shall maintain a position on the board. Board members are appointed for a 2-year term and may have their appointments extended to additional terms. And then your options are outlined below. So, any questions?
Thank you, city manager. Any questions? It's really a housekeeping matter, but we just felt the protocol that's gone to this point is that those appointments have been coming before council, and as the city manager outlined, believe the legislative services team is working on a procedure to try and clear the air around appointments when it's not directly related to a city legislative matter, but give us some direction. But at this time, this will just clean up some items that are outstanding. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Monroe.
I'll make the motion
If you would, please.
that council approve the appointment of the mayor. Oh, I mustn't have the updated motion, sorry.
So it should just read the mayor of the city of Lloydminster.
Yeah, that council approve the appointment of the mayor of the city of Lloydminster to the Lloydminster District Health Advisory Committee for a 2-year term from April 2020 to April 2022.
Thank you. Seconder, Counselor Fagnan. Any further discussion before I call for the question? Counselor Torson.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, just a comment. I think it'll be really useful to have the mayor position on this board as well, just so that there's even more kind of back and forth communication between this committee and the bi-provincial committee that exists, that I believe the mayor's position is on as well. And also just having a mayor who's got contact with cabinet ministers and things like that is, always useful to be able to get that regular contact with the provinces. So I think that, as far as moves go, that this will be very good in terms of moving the priorities forward of this committee. So thank you.
Thanks, Counselor. Any other comments? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. Please raise your hand, all in favor.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed, none, carried. Moving on to agenda item 6.2, City Manager. I'll look to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. To present 6.2.1 remote participation procedures, public hearings and in-camera meetings, I'll ask the City Clerk, Doug Rodwell, to present.
City Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. The item before you is remote participation procedures in public hearings and in-camera meetings. And the recommendation is that council accept the remote participation procedures for public hearings and in-camera meetings as best practice. The issue is the city must continue operational functions while ensuring legislative compliance during in light of the COVID-19 global pandemic and the uncertainty of when the city may return to normal function. Administration says it deemed it necessary to establish procedures regarding public hearings and in-camera meetings to ensure that business of governance continues with the least disruption. These procedures will ensure that bylaws developed can still be passed through the same process while meeting all legislative requirements, and that matters needing to be discussed in camera by council can still be discussed. Ensuring that members of the public are aware of these procedures will ensure transparency and accessibility for those wishing to participate in any public hearings held by the city. The procedures also reaffirm the public confidence that governance is continuing in a manner that ensures the safety of the public and administration and council. The public hearing procedure established guidelines for advertising, participation, and legislative and eligibility requirements. Administration created this document to ensure the members of the public have ease of access when wishing to participate in public hearings. Procedure outlines that members of the public may participate by submitting a written submission to the city clerk and then remotely attending the meeting via Conference Bridge or Zoom video conference. The in-camera procedure outlines the guidelines for member of council and administration participating in in-camera meetings, the programs to be used, and will ensure accountability. The options are that the council accepts these guidelines as best practice. The council direct administration to bring further information forward. Back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, City Clerk. Any questions or comments? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess there's certainly nothing wrong with the proposal, but I have a question about what if we have folks that want to speak at a public hearing that aren't really that versed or literate in the use of computers and Zoom and those kinds of things? Are we going to have an alternate way where they could be isolated somewhere in City Hall and be able to talk at a public hearing without going through the Zoom process? Because I know it took City Council a day or two to get organized with Zoom, and it may create certain people that would like to speak, make them gun shy, and their rights may be infringed upon because they're not able to communicate the way they'd like to.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. I'll look to the City Clerk for an answer on that.
Yes, Your Worship. This still allows an individual, if they're unable to attend a meeting or unable to log in, or if there's difficulty, they can write to the office of City Clerk, and I would read their submission during the public hearing. It also, we could find an alternate means for them to dial into the meeting. we will work with whoever contacts our office to ensure that they have the ability to have their voice heard should they wish to at a public hearing. That is the idea behind this process, to remove that fear from the public of trying to call into a meeting. Hopefully that answers your question, Councillor.
Councillor Baker.
Perfect. That's just what I wanted to hear, because I think we got to be all inclusive, and not everybody is necessarily as blessed as our mayor.
Well,
That's
thanks,
what you do.
Councillor. No, I think that a very good question, and I think that that's the message that we want to make sure that the community understands is, excuse me, nothing is not included, and all abilities will be ensured, that we try to ensure that they have the opportunity to present live. And if they're unable to attend, as we've had people being out of town for work or other items, they may need to send a written submission. So that'll always be there. But certainly I believe the legislative services team led by the city clerk will endeavor to ensure that people have that opportunity if they want to get a presentation to us for a public hearing or to city council. That can be done.
Thank you kindly.
You're very welcome. Good point, Councillor. It was a good question. Any other questions or comments from council regarding this matter? With that, without any further comments, I'll look for direction from council on the recommendation for 6.2.1, remote participation procedures regarding public hearings and in-camera meetings. Councillor Monroe.
That council accept remote participation procedures for public hearings and in-camera meetings as best practice.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor Thorson, thank you very much. Any further discussion, council, on this before I call for the final question? Not seeing any, I'll ask all council in favor to please raise their hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed? Carried. Moving on to 6.2.2. I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 6.2.2, the second floor development of the RCMP building, I'll ask the city clerk, Doug Rodwell, to present.
Thank you, Your Worship. The subject matter of this is the second floor development of the RCMP building. And the recommendation is the council approve the development of a portion of the second floor of the RCMP building in order to house the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team, or the ALERT team. The city administration has been in discussions with ALERT to have a full-time team placed in the city of Lloydminster, and the province of Alberta and the ALERT have agreed to have and will be standing up a team in the city of Lloydminster. Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams were established by the government of Alberta in 2006 to combat organized and serious crime. More than 300 municipal police and RCMP officers work together in teams to investigate everything from drug trafficking to child exploitation to gang violence. The goal is to create an even safer communities for all Albertans. The strength of the ALERT model lies in the integration of the members from various police agencies who have expertise in intelligence, enforcement, and support services. This cooperative approach to policing has proven to be an extremely successful model, especially as the criminal landscape evolves and pushes beyond the local and regional boundaries. Funding for the ALERT, including the cost of policing resources, is provided primarily by the government of Alberta, with significant contributions from the government of Canada. ALERT has committed to placing a team in Lloydminster to provide focused policing, not only to the city of Lloydminster, but to the surrounding region as well. It expects that the cost of the renovations to the second floor building in order to house the Lloydminster ALERT team will be estimated to be a maximum of $470,000, with the cost being split with ALERT at 70-30, where the city's maximum contribution will be $120,000. The city will enter into a long-term lease agreement with ALERT for this space, but once completed, the improvements will belong to the city. The city will obtain a consultant to provide detailed drawings and a more detailed cost estimate for the project, which will be brought forward to a future council meeting. The options are that council approve the development of the portion of the second floor, the council not approve the development of the second floor, or the council request further information. Alignment with the strategic plan is this item is in alignment with the following strategic area: internal, external communication and relationship building. Providing a space for the ALERT will promote communication and positive relationships between the RCMP and the city. And the financial implications are 30% of the cost of the project, which is the city's portion, is currently estimated at a maximum of $120,000. Funds to cover this cost would be taken from the Protective Services Capital Reserve account number 1-200-250-35120. And back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, City Clerk. Questions or comments? Councillor Diachek.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just again, I think that I'm excited to hear this step going forward for us in the city, and I think it's wonderful. The only thing I'm wondering about is, are there any timelines around this to the city clerk?
Once we get a detailed drawing and we know what the project looks like moving forward, we'll work with Alert to finalize that. And when we bring that forward to a future council meeting, we will have a project timeline to bring forth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker. Well, just hang on, Councillor Baker. I think we're going to get you live, right? There you are. You're live now, I believe.
Sorry, pardon me.
No problem.
Have we made a public statement about this, about the alert coming to the city?
This is
Because the way this came out, if we haven't, people start asking questions, and I'm not sure just how qualified we would be to answer any of those questions. I guess whatever it says in that report, is that it, or are we going to do a public announcement? Thank you.
Sorry, Your Worship. At this point, this will be the announcement that we make, and this is just for the development. Future announcements for the establishment of the team will be coordinated between Alert, the city, and the government of Alberta, and that'll be as the team stands up in the future.
Councillor Baker.
Am I on, Your Worship?
Yes, you are.
Well, I guess if we're dealing with the alert today and the renovation, people will ask questions. And I don't feel qualified to answer any of them. A little bit from the report. I just wondered if we're saying we're doing this to accommodate the alert, then the questions will start. So I think maybe some thought should be given to that. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Councillor Baker. City Clerk, anything else you want to add to that?
Once again, once the team's established in Lloydminster, then there'll be a more public unveiling and announcement. The Alert team, once again, is a provincial law enforcement team from the province of Alberta, funded by the province of Alberta and the government of Canada. So there's no additional cost for that policing service to the city of Lloydminster. But as we move forward, we anticipate questions from the public, and we'll do our best to respond to those as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? City Manager.
Just two quick things. The group we've been working with Alert was aware of the RFD that's being presented today, so they support the information that's in here. So anything that's in here isn't non-public, if you want to call it that. So they're fully aware of that. My second comment is, and I missed this before the RFD went out, but just if we were to approve the recommendation, if we could just add from Protective Services Capital Reserve account number 1-200-250-3512 to the motion, that would be great. So we can track the motion and where the funds are coming from.
Okay. All right. So noted. I guess, Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I understand where Councillor Baker is kind of coming from on this one as far as stealing thunder type of thing. I thought there would be a little more fanfare, I guess, before we got to this point. But if the Alert team is totally fine with us moving forward with this portion of it, I'm good with that. And it's one of those things where when you look at things prior to being on council, and you see like that building with all the extra space, how it was built, not knowing context, anything like that, you just think, oh, we've got this overbuilt, unusable space. But hindsight's 2020, and boy, are we lucky to have the extra space to be able to house this unit. So really looking forward to the fact that we can have a long-term lease going there. We've got additional services coming out of our city and improved services coming out of our city from a law enforcement perspective. And then the cost at which we're able to do this is, kind of better than you could have hoped for in terms of a 70-30 split in terms of developing that space. So great job to everyone who's been, communicating back and forth. In a way, it's a shame that we need this service in our area, but, understanding where crime moves across Saskatchewan and Alberta and kind of passes through Lloydminster, it's going to be, extremely, useful strategic spot for them to be in terms of dealing with these things, and really looking forward to what we can do moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that it's been documented here in our discussions that ideally be for them to have a home. That's what came before council today. And because we're providing the space or offering the space for lease and the work that has to be done in a public setting, that's why the proposal came forward as it did today, I understand, from administration. And I think it's a good step for our city, and it'll be a bigger step once the team is struck or created and gets into action. But I think the big part is that we have a home for them. And I appreciate, we often as council have a lot of discussion about space and building, and when you build, do you build it properly and do you build for the future? And I do appreciate very much the administration and councils that did a lot of debate and discussion in creating the RCMP building that we have today, because now we are going to see great utilization for a great purpose moving forward. And I think that's important. And I'm reminded of that by lots of people, former council members many times over, and residents saying that you have to do plan for the future. And I think that's an important step. So appreciate that. I do have a question for the city clerk, and I don't want to dive into this too deep, but just for anyone that may not be familiar with Alert, Alert is a separate organization from the RCMP, even though Alert is made up of RCMP. Is that correct in most cases, city clerk?
As the RFD mentions, the Alert is staffed by municipal forces as well as the RCMP. They are an Alberta law enforcement team stood up by the province of Alberta and staffed by, you're correct, Your Worship, a lot of RCMP, but there is a municipal component to that. They are not an actual RCMP detachment.
Thank you. And I think that's the important part. I want to make sure that the first assurance I want to make sure that I have and that the residents of the city have is we're not losing any RCMP services. In essence, we're going to have enhanced policing in a different, this will be a different format from the RCMP that do everything from traffic to the general investigations to follow up on break and enters and all the other crime that occurs currently in the city. The Alert team will be in essence more targeted and will have a different purpose than even though they are RCMP. Is that the best description, City Clerk?
Absolutely, and it's important to note that it's a regional law enforcement team. So not only will crime in the city, because we know crime knows no borders, that it will deal with crime in the regional area to ensure that it's dealt with at its core, and just one unit is dealing with that sort of thing. It will not take away from the policing services the NCP provide.
All right, thank you. Is there any other questions? Councillor Thorson, do you have a question?
No, I was just going to make the motion if there's no other questions.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure. I know the city clerk had, or sorry, the city manager had mentioned he'd like to see just a little bit of wording. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Councillor Thorson? Okay, then I will entertain that motion, Councillor Thorson.
Okay, I move that council approve the development of a portion of the second floor of the RCMP building in order to house the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team, and funds to cover this cost would be taken from the Protective Services Capital Reserve account number 1-200-250-35120.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder, Councillor Baker.
Yes, sir.
Okay, is there any further discussion or questions before I call for the question? Not seeing any. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 6.2.3. I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 6.2.3, amendment to the 2020 meeting schedule, I'll ask once again Doug Rodwell to present.
Thank you, Council and Your Worship. The item before you is amendment to the 2020 meeting schedule, and the recommendation that council approve an addition of a regular council meeting on Monday, May 11th, 2020 at 1 p.m. to review and provide decision on a second and third readings to bylaw 18-2020, the mill rate bylaw. The issue is to provide council with a proposed change to the meeting schedule and add an additional meeting. Administration is bringing forward bylaw number 18-2020, the mill rate bylaw, to council for its first reading at today's meeting. In order to have property taxes mailed and to property owners before May 30th, administration is requesting an addition of a regular council meeting on May 11th, 2020 for bylaw approval. This allows for the second and third readings to proceed and will ensure tax notices are mailed out. Tax notices mailed out is not delayed and will allow more time before they are due. The options are that council approve the addition to the meeting, council not approve the addition to the meeting, and council request further information. And back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, City Clerk. Questions, comments from City Council? Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, so I was just looking at the schedule, Your Worship, and so we have a GPC on May 11th at 1:30. So are we suggesting we just have a regular council meeting from 1 to 1:30? Or
That is what I understand.
okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
City Clerk, if I understood correctly, the administration really wants to try and stay in a formalized format that taxpayers are used to. So their tax notices would go out the end of May. They're due technically July 10th, but because of what council's done, they're not going to be due until November 10th. But just to stay on that format, that's the intention of what we're doing here. Is that
Taxes would be due upon mailing and upon receipt. However, because of council's relief program, penalties would not be applied until November 10th. So if a resident is unable to forward their taxes till that time, then they can defer their tax payment until November 10th. But once again, as we've mentioned along, those residents will pay.
Thank you. Absolutely. Well put, City Clerk. Councilor Torreson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, so, there was a time when I saw this and I thought to myself that, is this really necessary? Because we have until November really before penalties apply. And then how many people are actually going to continue to pay on time? And I guess at the end of the day, when you think about how many people that use different methods for paying, whether through their mortgage or something along those lines, I still think it's important that we follow the process that we always do, and that we really make sure on our communication out to the public that yes, we are creating options for those who are going through economic hardship right now through the COVID period and through everything else. That we have options available to them for how they can defer their taxes, and we won't apply any penalties till a much later date than what the normal schedule would be. But anyone who can, it's really important that they know and understand that it's very useful to the city's finances overall, that they continue on their normal process. If nothing's changed for them economically, that it's appreciated if they continue on the normal path. So that's why I think it's important that we continue on with our normal schedule of doing things, so that those who have the ability and there's really no change for them, they continue on with the normal process. Because then that limits the amount of interest that the city may have to pay that will ultimately result in more property taxes down the road. And that's just the way these things work. Because if we need to borrow money to be able to finance this activity, that money is going to have to come from somewhere.
Absolutely, Councillor, well put. And it's well said from that perspective, because it is a matter of balancing the city and ensuring that we have the ability to pay our bills, just to continue to do road repairs, water and sewer replacements, and all the projects that we hope to accomplish to improve the quality of life in our city for our residents. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. I'll look for direction from council on 6.2.3. Councillor Torreson.
I move that council approve the addition of a regular council meeting on Monday, May 11th, 2020 at 1 p.m. to review and provide a decision on second and third readings to bylaw number 18-2020 mill rate bylaw.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Fagnan, thank you very much. Any further discussion, questions from council before I call for the question? Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Am I alive, Your Worship?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Your Worship, it's nothing new to hear me talk about the economic conditions in our city. And I'm not sure it's getting any better. And I guess the last time you and I had a discussion was on March 20th. And I outlined my concerns then, and I still have them and was back as far as November of 2019 that the conditions are, I believe, very tough for a number of people. But it's also very tough for some of these businesses where their assessment's gone up extremely high compared to the average. And we say that we can't find a way to assist with those problems. And I'm not questioning that because the law is the law. But I want to know before we get to May 11th, if there's anything else the city is going to consider to try and hold these taxes down. Like, for example, I appreciate all the projects and capital projects that we're going to try and get done this year, and the ones we got left over from last year. And a lot of them have government, provincial and federal money attached to getting them done. So we cannot afford to leave those sit now that we have some grant money to deal with them. But I really ask that we have another look at any projects that are non-grant supported and really have a hard look at if some of those can be deferred to help assist with some of these problems. Because in spite of what some people think, I believe there's a lot of people out there really hurting. And I really worry about the future if we don't deal with some of these problems at this time. This isn't normal times. It's probably something, and hopefully none of us will ever see again in our lifetime, whether you're 25 years old or you're 75 years old. But in any case, we really be cognizant of what's really going on out in our city. And yes, there are people that have a fair amount of money, and there's a lot of people that don't have a lot of money, but there's a lot of businesses that I believe are going to be stretched to even pay their basic taxes from where they were last year. That's all I got to say, Your Worship, and I'll leave it in your capable hands. We can talk about it on the 11th.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll actually discuss it in the next motion after this one is dealt with, I believe, in the next presentation from administration. So, point well taken. Any further questions before I call for the question? Not seeing any. All in favor, please raise their hand.
Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Opposed? Carried. Moving on to 6.3, City Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 6.3.1 2020 budget revisions, I'll ask the CFO Denise McDonald to present.
Afternoon, Mayor and Council.
Good afternoon, CFO.
I have in front of you today the 2020 spring budget revisions. And so just to give you some background, on November 25th, the Council approved the 2020 budget to collect municipal levy of $37,207,940. That's excluding the unfunded amortization. On February 24th, Council then approved the 2019 carry forward projects. So you will see in the summary below that the $17,957,612 variance is the complete list of the carry forward projects. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, it is due to the COVID-19 pandemic and its financial impact on the residents and taxpayers of the city, the 2020 budget has been reduced from what we first proposed by approximately $1.2 million, or slightly over 3%. If I could get the agenda to move down a page or two to the attachment, one more page. There. So you'll see in front of you the operating budget. So if I can just take, if I'm doing too much detail, please stop me. If you want more detail, then of course ask questions and we'll try to provide the answers. But before you on this page is the operating budget. So what we have increased is the government transfers by $236,224. and that includes the MSI operating grant. When we first proposed the budget in November, we were unaware of the exact dollar amounts, and so now that we have that information from the province, we've increased the MSI operating grant by $7,789. The Saskatchewan municipal revenue sharing was also increased by $228,435. We've decreased the net municipal taxes by $1,249,501. And then our transfer to reserves were reduced by $115,000 to support those changes, as well as transfers to capital of $897,000. So then if we go to the next page, this is what happens with our capital. So we've increased 3.2. So you'll see that as the line items for grants has increased 3.2, and then there's a note 1 to reference to explain it. So 3.2 million was included from the MSI capital funding on the fire station construction. And then we go to reserves. Taxation reserves has decreased by 2.6 million, and that's note number 2. So there's a number of items that make that up. We've decreased the draw from reserves by 3.275 million and reassigned funding from MSI capital grant on the fire station, as I just mentioned. We've decreased the roof replacement that will come from it'll come from a reserve instead. And the recreation and culture library refresh relocation was increased from grants. We've also increased funding from reserves for LGCC signage of 7,700 and LGCC T-box restoration. We actually took one project out and replaced it by the T-box, which they felt was more appropriate this year. Updated funding sources of 575,000 on the roof replacement. That's a draw from reserves. So then when we get to note 3, which is on operation current year taxation, so that's money that's being taxed this year. We've reduced that by 822,000, and when you add those two together, they match up to what was purported in under the operation as a transfer to capital reserves of the 897,000. So note 4 on the previous page. And it includes rectifying the initial budget entry. So we had a dollar amount between two projects that was off slightly. So the pool chemical controller increased by 5,000, but the replacement pump CO2 decreased by 5,000. We've decreased funding from the current year's taxation on the BioClean Aquatic Center for the heat exchanger. We've reduced the total cost of that project by $202,000, and that was to reduce the property taxes. We've canceled project GIS software and implementation of 100,000. We've reduced project budget on the IT multifunctional printers from 25,000 to 25,000 to 5,000. We've decreased the funding from the current year's taxation on project for the library refresh and relocation. We've supported it by a grant of 5,000. Yes. And then number 4, note number 4 is the decrease in budget and funding on project for the sanitary sewer replacement was decreased by 75,000. So then we get to note 5, which is expenses for capital expenditures of 349,300. And that just repeats some of them we've already mentioned. We've canceled the GIS, we reduced the printers project, we've reduced the budget on the sanitary sewer replacement, and we've decreased the budget on the heat exchangers. We've added 2 new projects that weren't captured in the initial budget that we had missed, and that was the LGCC signage, LGCC T-box. And then note 6 has to do with capital projects that we missed in the carry forward. So that's the Neely Edmonds Storm System Improvements was initially omitted when it was carried forward, and it has 250,000 remaining on that project. And we need approval for it. And then group number 7 is any projects that have already gone to council in the 2020 year that have received approval through motions. And most of those are from reserves. And so we've listed them there. We do not need approval, but we just want that dollar amount in order to include it in the tax rate bylaw. So you'll see in that detail that it also includes the alert retrofit. If something happens that you choose not to go forward with that, then certainly it's not impacting the taxation at this point, and it can be canceled or included from reserves. And so then if we can go back to the summary. One more page back. One more. There. And so it's important that council recognizes that part of the budget is our allocations to grants. And by approving the budget, it also approves these allocations. So the MSI, we're looking at fire hall for 3.2 million. The PioClean aquatic heat exchangers are included in MSI for 298,000. The library refresh and relocation of 575,000. 2020 street improvement program for 500,000. Under the Saskatchewan federal gas tax, airport taxiway has been included for 250,000. Traffic light coordination on Highway 17 for 425,000. Sanitary main replacement program for 1 million. Under the Alberta federal gas tax, we're looking at the sidewalk and road condition survey for 40,000. Street improvement program, 1 million. It's supported also under the MSI program. There's some stacking of grants on that one. 2020 traffic signal hardware improvement program for 375,000. Trails and sidewalk master plan for 150. And Bud Miller all season park entrance walking trail for 150,000. Did you want me to finish or answer the question now?
If you'll take the question,
Sure.
Councilor Thorson.
Yeah, just on the Alberta federal gas tax ones, so the Trails and Sidewalk Master Plan, I was under the impression that that one came in quite a bit under budget, like below the 150. Is that not correct? Yeah, I want to say it was only like 90,000 in the end. It's off the top of my head.
I don't have that information unless the city manager has it.
Yeah, I think you're correct, Councillor Thorson. So what will happen with that is if it does come in at the end under budget, any of these projects, the money can be carried forward to a future year. Or if any of these projects go over, we can actually allocate more money to these projects, to the other projects that we can balance the grants on them. So the grants that are shown here are the finance will have access to the budgeted projects. They might not have all the details yet on. You and I talked about that project last week, so that's probably why you know that detail. But anyways, you're correct on that one. But the balancing will happen at the end of that grant. So when we at the end of the year when we can allocate it to a different project, or if other projects come in higher than this, then we can allocate other grant money to that.
Okay, fair enough. Just jumped off the page at me, so I'll let you continue, Denise. Sorry, or
That's
CFO.
okay. So that being said, we have this is in alignment with the following strategic areas. We're trying to be open and transparent about what's changed from the November meeting. The net impact on the tax rate is 1,249,501 reduction in the 2020 municipal tax levy. And on the page before that, you'll see, we'll go back to that summary where you can see that we're budgeting for an overall surplus that's been reduced from 9,000 to 8,000. That's just to show that we're in a surplus position budget. You can see our capital works there. And these are the numbers that would be put forward to the tax rate bylaw. So the options that council have is to approve this revised budget or hold for more information. I can read the recommendation for you that council approve the revised 2020 budget with a total operating revenue of $47,851,016, operating expenditures of $83,801,361, plus amortization of $23,254,085, resulting in a taxation levy requirement of $35,958,439, excluding amortization, and the 2020 capital budget, which has a total capital revenues of $48,966,637 to support a similar amount for dollar amount for expenditures. With that, I pass it back to the mayor.
Thank you very much, CFO. Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had one other question, and it kind of came up from one of my comments on the last agenda item, and that was, any additional costs that come in terms of interest for short-term debt as we move, as we create a deferral for property taxes and for utilities. I just don't see any changes within our budget to any bank charges or interest or anything like that. I'm curious, have any of those been factored within our budget, and should we be, or are we assuming that, we likely won't have to use any kind of short-term debt to get us through that deferral period?
We have not made any changes to our operating budget for revenue and expenditures and bank charges. However, our legislation does say that if we are required to use that line of credit, we have to bring it to balance by December 31st too. So there will be interest charges. We'll have to cover it off at the end of the reserve at the year with council's permission from a reserve or something, and then increase the rates next year to replace that money.
So
our hope is to not have to use that line of credit. We're going to try our best to do that.
So just to be clear, it's not included in the operating budget for what we are presenting today, or what we're getting, what we're asking residents to pay in property taxes for the current year. But in a scenario where you need to actually use it, you'll kind of have to ask for permission at that time because it's not budgeted to be able to use it. And then eventually we will have to make the budget balance in the future years.
Yeah, we'll have to recover that money through taxation at some point in the future.
Okay.
I'll take the city manager and then say Councillor Baker. City manager first.
Yeah, further to that, I think there's a number of unknowns with the COVID pandemic, and facility revenues, salaries, facility expenditures, all those different things come into play that are very difficult to predict at this time. And so administration is very well aware of what those will be, and we are working on reports for council as time goes on, and as we can predict, as facilities hopefully reopen in the near future, and as we get back to a norm, that we'll be able to have a better idea in terms of what some of these changes will look like, whether it's bank charges, whether it's investment income, whether it's revenue at Service Sports Center, all those different things that are going to be impacted as a result. So a lot of those are we're doing our best on this end to manage the expenses with the lost revenue that we're going to have, but we're also going to see some potential savings on facilities as you're not managing 2 ice surfaces during the summer. You're not, so there's some things like that that administration's working through at this point.
If you can bear with me, Councillor Baker, I believe Councillor Thorson's got a supplementary question there. So
no, just a final comment. I can confirm that budgeting in this scenario is one of the most challenging things to do. So I understand the difficulty that the finance department and that the city is going through overall and from administration. So so far, I just want to say, as far as comments go, that I think it's really important that we did move the needle in terms of bringing property taxes down and making adjustments to expenses and on capital projects, especially thinking about capital projects that maybe you cannot do because of the kind of the COVID situation, where it'd be more of a challenge with social distancing and everything to be able to actually accomplish those projects. So I really appreciate all the hard work that went into getting us to this point, and at 3.36% decrease from our original past budget, which I believe brings us down to below 2019 or below 2019 taxes. I think, you know, administration and finance did a great job on that, and I'm sure it was not easy to do, to go through every single thing and essentially redo the budget in this scenario where we have to find places to kind of cut so that we could pass those savings along to taxpayers. So thank you very much for all your efforts.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Worship. My presentation or speech a few minutes ago was nothing to do with to criticize anything that's been done. These reports are great. They've always been great. The last couple of years, they've been, and I've seen a lot of them, have been so easy to follow, comparatively speaking. I understand the projects and what we're trying to do. But when we passed this in November, we didn't have the virus. And the world has changed. That's where I'm coming from. So what was good 6-7 months ago, now it's May, that's 6 months ago. And things have changed. 10 minutes before this meeting started today, now they're talking about 100,000 people losing their lives in the United States. Not 50 or 60, but 100,000 or more. And some of these issues that are going on, it's easy to say we're going to reopen and go to work. But there's a lot of workers that are going to be at risk. And how is that going to affect their jobs and how they're going to pay their taxes? That's really where I'm coming from. And all I was asking is there's some units, buildings in this town that have taken some fairly hefty assessment increases. And you don't have to tell me because they might have done something to the building. I'm talking about the buildings that nothing has been done to them since the day they were built. They may be 5 years old and maybe 10 years old, but nothing's been done to them. And all of a sudden the assessments are jumping. And I don't have to tell you about them because they're right in those reports. But at the same time, what are those people going to do? They're not talking about a $50 increase in their taxes. Some of them are looking at fairly hefty taxes. And we deferred them for 3 months or whatever it is, 3-4 months. And that was great. But we still don't know if the city's going to be open to full force like it was a year ago. There's places in the United States, they opened the beaches, they opened this, now they're closing them all down again because the spike in the virus. And I don't know where it's going for sure, and neither does most people by the sound of it. But in any case, that's where I'm coming from, Your Worship. It's nothing to criticize what's been done because it's excellent work. And it has been for the last 2 years, at least. And I just want you to know how I feel about this before the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There's no question, you know, the budget is a portion of the process that we go through. The staff spend a great deal of time working through this as administration starting a year ago, and they work through this continuously. And as Councillor Thorson mentioned and Councillor Baker, I appreciate the work that's gone into it from the CFO and the team in the finance department, working with all the other administration teams to bring us a budget that, and I remind council and the public, and the council I think is very familiar with this administration, is that we have to produce either a balanced budget or in this case, a slight surplus of $8,000 on an $83 million budget. And I think that's the important piece that's there. We deal with we talked about grants, and let's talk about the federal and provincial governments. They have the abilities that we as a city do not have as a municipality. A, we are not allowed to operate in a deficit situation on an annual basis. And B, we are not allowed to borrow without a capital purchase or a capital and a payment plan. For every debt the city incurs, there's a payment plan. And that's the background that I don't think a lot of people see in the paperwork that's laid before us. We've got a couple numbers and it represents the entire city for a year. And I appreciate what the city manager said. We could be continuously budgeting on a daily basis, because as our expenses have may decrease, so is our income, or vice versa. And it's an extremely challenging portion of this. You're absolutely right, Councilor Baker. No one knows, and that we'll be talking about that for some time, I suspect. I don't know how long, and I wish I had a time frame. Without cluttering about where we've been at, we did have a reopen plan, and that plan has been adjusted, and we don't have an adjustment date. So that affects the dollars and cents, but at the end of the day, we still need to provide the services. And I hope I'm on the right term, that the community has come to know and appreciate. Doesn't matter if you're a senior and you have attended the Legacy Center, you have a facility where your children or grandchildren are playing sports, or you have been to the BioClean Aquatic Center for fitness. It's just an incredible city that we have, but at the same time, there's no end to the costs that continue to operate. And I appreciate administration went back, reviewed the budget. 3% seems like maybe not a huge number, and it could be bigger, it could be smaller. And I appreciate where they've got to by taking through the projects that they've looked at. And this is one of the toughest jobs. I think we've been through this, between understanding and helping people understand the mill rate, which is a part of the process, and we'll get to that as well in this meeting. Understanding the whole taxation system, because there's multiple pieces to it, starting with the assessment and the property that people have. So I do appreciate what administration's done, and I appreciate them bringing forward a reduction to try and show the community that we are attuned to what is going on in the community. We could have, I don't want to even say we could slash it 20%, but what would we not have going on in our city tomorrow then moving forward? That's what people, I think, have to realize, that it is challenging. And I don't have the answers to how people are going to pay their taxes, but in the same token, I know they'll continue to want those potholes filled. They'll want to see, as we have the street sweepers working on the streets today, and they'll be working for a while, so that people know that the streets are safe. When you have your children out bicycling and they step on the brakes, they don't slide in the gravel. They'll hopefully have dry pavement underneath them and things like that. So there's so many pieces to the work that we do that impact our city, yet they don't always show the value. And I think that's the hard part of this for many people, looking at how can you spend the kind of dollars we're spending. But I appreciate the work the administration's done. Thank you very much. Any other, Councilor Baker?
Just to be clear, Your Worship, I was not talking about operations.
Okay.
I was talking about non-second or third-party funded capital projects.
Okay.
Projects, other words, that are financed directly by the city taxpayer. Where we have grants, I understand why they got to move forward. I understand the operations. I'm just saying, if there are some projects and 50 grand here and 100 grand there, it doesn't sound like much, but it might be.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm asking about. Because we have some people that really got nailed with some big assessment increases, and nothing has happened to their buildings to change the assessment, other than we said there's been some mistakes made in the past. And that's hard to take. And it's hard for them to take. So I'll leave it at that, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Baker. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. I'll look for direction on 6.3.1, 2020 budget revisions. Councilor Fagnan. We'll get you turned on there. And
here we go.
We are. Councilor Fagnan, go ahead.
That council approved the revised 2020 budget with a total operating revenue of $47,851,016, operating expenditures of $83,801,361, plus amortization of $23,254,085, resulting in a tax levy requirement of $35,958,439, excluding amortization. And the 2020 capital budget, which has total capital revenues of $48,966,637 to support total expenditures of $48,966,937.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder. Councillor Torreson, thank you very much. Is there any further question regarding the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please raise your hand. Get everybody there, City Clerk? You're turned off right now.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed? Carried. Moving on to 6.4, back to the City Clerk. Or sorry, City Manager, my apologies.
Thank you, Worship. For 6.4.1, bylaw number 14-2020, operating line of credit bylaw. Pass it back to the CFO, Denise McDonald.
Thanks, Council. So this is back on April 20th, we brought forward an operating line of credit to give it first reading. We're anticipating increasing the maximum operating line of credit to 25 million. Currently, we have 12.5, and we have the opportunity to go for the full amount that we would leverage for taxation levy. So we have the ability to go up to almost 36 million, our current year's levy of what you just proposed. Section 119 of the Lloydminster Charter states this section applies to a borrowing made for the purpose of financing operating expenditures. The amount to be borrowed, together with unpaid principal of other borrowings made for the purpose of financing operating expenditures, must not exceed the amount of the city estimates would be raised in taxes in the year of the borrowing is made. Administration would only use a line of credit as necessary to meet short-term cash flow needs, and approving the line of credit will ensure the requirements set out in the Lloydminster Charter and authorized financial institutions are met. This item is in alignment with sustainable fiscal strategy, and anticipate a line of credit in the amount of 25 million will provide security to ensure that the city has sufficient cash flow to meet its service delivery requirements throughout the coming months. So we're looking for approve both motions as indicated in the recommendations above, or to not grant second and third reading to bylaw 14/2020 operating line of credit.
Thank you, Chief Financial Officer. Questions or comments from council? Councillor Torreson.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, just a comment, just, so that the public kind of understands what's going on here is that, by taking out the additional operating line of credit, this gives us the ability to actually do the deferrals. So if we run into a cash flow issue with all the projects that go on in the summer and everything in terms of city operations, that we have this as a tool in our toolbox to be able to access funding in the short term, to be able to continue on with city operations and continue on doing things as we normally do, so that we can offer them a deferral so it can help them get through the tough period that may result from the economic crisis that is kind of brewing due to COVID-19. So that's all.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments? CFO, if I can ask this, in the past, it's been some time that I'm aware of that, or could you know when the last time the city had to reach into their line of credit to operate? Do you have that information?
I as far back as I know, that there was a line of credit in 2016, and since then it has not been utilized.
Absolutely. Terrific. Thank you. And I think that, as you said, Councillor Torreson, it's here as a backstop because the city needs to continue to operate. We've heard very clearly that, and we've had no shortage of discussion about the COVID-19 and the economic situation our city faces and our taxpayers. So we hope that we don't have to access this, but as good, prudent financial management, it's a tool in the toolbox that will be used and will be cleared up because, as we discussed earlier in the last couple of conversations, the city cannot run in the deficit position. And at the end of the day, the line of credit will have to be paid and the interest accrued will be paid as well. And at the end of the day, it has to be accounted for. So I do appreciate making sure that our financial position as a city, because no one wants to be calling a supplier and saying, sorry, we don't have enough money to pay you this month, you're going to have to wait. And I think that in the business of fair and honest trade and business that goes on, the city wants to ensure that they can pay their bills when those bills are incurred, simply just due to the challenges that we are facing as a community. Any other comments? Not seeing any. I will look to council for direction on bylaw 6.4.1, second reading. Councillor Torson.
I move that council grant second reading to bylaw number 14-2020, operating line of credit bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder, Councillor Diachuk. Any further question on the motion on the floor? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed and carried. Councillor Torson, if you'd be so kind.
Yep, I move that council grant third and final reading to bylaw number 14-2020, operating line of credit bylaw.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Diachuk. Thank you very much. Again, I'll ask the question. Is there any question or comment regarding the motion on the floor? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, City Clerk. Opposed and carried. Thank you, CFO. Moving on to 6.4.2 to the City Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. To present 6.4.2, bylaw number 18-2020, mill rate and taxable assessment bylaw. I'll pass it over to the City Clerk, Doug Rodwell, to present.
Thank you, Your Worship. The item I have before you is bylaw number 18-2020, the mill rate and taxable assessment bylaw. And the recommendation is that council grant first reading to bylaw 18-2020, the mill rate and taxable assessment bylaw. Administration has calculated the 2020 mill rates based on the new assessment roll and the 2020 budget requirements. There may still be revisions to the assessment roll as a result of the appeal process prior to the final reason bylaw, which will be adjusted for in the mill rates. Council's approval of the bylaw is required in order to begin the levy process and ensure the 2020 tax notices are delivered to property owners in a timely manner. Council is required to annually pass a property tax bylaw under section 302 and 319 of the Lloydminster Charter to set mill rates. These rates are calculated based on the required revenues that are determined during the budget process, the requisition from the school divisions, and the new assessment roll received from the city assessor. The total taxable assessment for the 2020 tax year is $4.576 billion, which is up from $4.435 billion in 2019, or 3.4% overall increase. In 2020, with the assessment and the proposed mill rate changes, the tax levy will collect an estimated $35,958,439 for municipal purposes as approved in the 2020 budget with the proposed amendments. The mill rate is made up of a municipal levy residential, a municipal levy non-residential, a seamless education levy, a residential levy residential, and an education levy non-residential, and a commercial mill rate factor. The total residential mill rate is at 9.4560, and the total commercial levy is 15.4382 mils. The options for council is council grant the first reading to bylaw 18-2020, the mill rate taxable assessment bylaw, or the council not grant the first reading to the bylaw. This will and request further information. This will allow administration to bring back more information to council, but would delay in the mailing of the tax notices to property owners. Governance is that council is required to annually pass property tax bylaw under section 302 and 319 of the Lloydminster Charter to set mill rates. And the budget is 2020 identified a municipal levy revenue to balance the budget. And the approved budget in November was for the municipal levy of $37,207,940. However, through budget revisions, administration was able to reduce the initial budget afforded approximately $1.2 million to $35,958,439, and that levy will be generated by the calculated mill rates. I will now walk council through a presentation of the mill rates. If you could bring that up, Wendy, thank you. And the first slide is the 2019 municipal mill rate comparison, and it's a comparison of the neighboring Alberta municipality residential rates. The city of Lloydminster remains one of the lowest residential municipal mill rates in comparison with other mid-sized cities in Alberta at 6.5910 mils. Lloydminster residential municipal mill rate was below the average of 7.285 and the median of 7.2245 among comparable municipalities in 2019. The 2019 non-residential mill rate comparison is once again a comparison of neighboring Alberta municipalities' non-residential rates. The city of Lloydminster has an average non-residential mill rate in comparison with other mid-sized cities of 11.8372 mils. Lloydminster's non-residential mill rate was below both the average of 12.6913 and the median of 12.5763 among comparable municipalities in 2019. That brings me to the 2020 proposed residential municipal mill rate comparison. It's once again a comparison of the same neighboring Alberta municipalities and based on approved tax revenue budget increases found in neighboring Alberta mid-sized municipalities, which may be subject to change. These proposed residential mill rates do not account for the other cities' assessment losses, but does account for the city of Lloydminster's assessment losses to date. As you can see that we've reduced our mill rate from our 2019 rate of 6.5910 to 6.3165, which once again makes the city of Lloydminster one of the lower in the comparable cities. The 2020 proposed non-residential municipal mill rate comparison is once again the same neighboring Alberta municipalities. And once again, based on their approved budgets, which may change based on their budget allocations. And once again, it is reduced slightly from 1.8372 mils in 2019 to 1.3698 mils in 2020. Next up is the Saskatchewan municipal taxes comparison, and this is based on a $350,000 residential property, and it's a comparison of Saskatchewan municipalities. Comparison is not using mill rates because many Saskatchewan cities have a base tax before the mill rate is applied to assessment. Based on last year's mill rates, the city of Lloydminster is around the median of municipal taxes in Saskatchewan as well. With the proposed mill rate decrease, Lloydminster would become the second lowest rate of the 5 comparable municipalities. And as council can see, the city of Lloydminster would move to the second lowest with a reduction from its 2020 2.307 to 2.211. The next up is the graphic is taken from the Camelot Assessment Growth Analysis. Assessment in 2019 is 2020 tax year. The new taxable assessment is approximately $160 million. This is based on a 3.6% increase due to new construction, completion of existing construction, and the reinspection of other properties done in 2019. In 2019, the increase was 0.07%, or 0.7%, sorry. Inflation decreased the taxable assessment by approximately $9.7 million, or 0.2%. This is based on analysis of the market. Last year's decrease was 2%. The total taxable assessment increased by 3.4% with the total taxable assessment base increased by 3.4% with a 1.1% increase in residential assessments and a 9.6% increase in non-residential assessments. Last year's total taxable assessment decreased by 1.3%. The total assessment value has increased by approximately $152 million since the levy last year. This includes an increase of $1.8 million to exempt property, partially due to new nonprofit exemptions, and an increase of $150 million of taxable property. Last year, total assessment decreased by $5.1 million, $51 million. Actual assessment numbers and mill rates are still subject to change with further assessment revisions. Next slide shows a percentage of change in taxable assessment. From this side, council can see that 92% of properties will only see an assessment change of plus or minus 10%. The lion's share seeing a reduction. Of course, there is a small percentage of increase at the higher levels of 0.3%. At 100% of change, 25 to 100% is 0.74% of the community's assessed value, and 10 to 25% is 4.64. 0 to 10% is 28.91%, and the remainder of the community will see a no change or a reduction to their assessed value. A further breakdown of the next slide is a further breakdown of the slide into 2% increments, and over 77% of assessments change by less than plus or minus 4%. The next slide is the assessed changes by subdivision. And as council will note, the assessment department has prepared the above graph by analyzing the changes in the assessment between 2019 and 2020 tax year for each subdivision in the city. There have been some minor changes due to assessment revisions. And I will call council's attention, for example, to the Wigfield area, where that's where the you see the 13% change. That is the construction of the casino and the assessment of the casino. In the Willows, you'll see a 41.44%, which is only actually a $46,000 change. And that's just an assessment of a piece of land that was not previously assessed. The next slide breaks down those areas for council to see where in the city those different subdivisions are. So now when we look at the next slide, we're looking at the residential impact, and this is municipal levies only. And I will quickly go through these. If council approves a mill rate of 6.3165, a decrease of 4.6%, which is a decrease of 4.6% from 2019, the municipal levy would generate a tax revenue of $36 million based on a proposed budget 2020 amendments. The average residential assessment is $288,392, and the monthly impact is a figure using no assessment change. Also used as property value of $250,000, $350,000, and $500,000 as comparables. And I'll just walk council through. If a property is assessed at $250,000 in 2020, it will see a reduction of $68.63 in its annual municipal levy, or $5.72 a month. An average property, which is the average residential assessment of $288,392, will see a reduction in $79.16 annually, or $6.60 a month. $350,000 property will see a reduction annually of $96.07 or $8.01 a month. And finally, the $500,000 property will see a municipal levy reduction of $137.25 or $11.44 a month. The non-residential impact of municipal levies, and this is municipal levies only for non-residential. We use the comparative properties of $750,000, $1 million, $1,135,822, and $1.5 million, with the average non-residential assessment being the $1,135,822 property. The first property at $750,000 for the non-residential impact will see a reduction in their taxes of $350.55 or $29.21. Property valued at $1 million will see a reduction in their annual assessment of $467.40 or a monthly of $38.59. The average assessed property of $1,135,822 will see a reduction annually of $530.88 or a monthly reduction of $44.24. A property assessed at the $1.5 million level will see a reduction of $701.10 or a monthly reduction of $58.42. The education levy will generate approximately $15.1 million, including the seamless levy based on the proposed tax rate. The localized education rates from Alberta and Lloydminster as follows: 2.5765 for residential, or 4.7% decrease, and 3.5054 for non-residential, or 9% decrease. I know the slide says we are currently waiting for the order in council, but we have received the order in council from Saskatchewan, which approves these rates. And I'll move to the next slide, which shows the residential impact for education only. So once again, the same comparable properties for residential. A residential impact to a $250,000 property will see a $31.43 annual reduction, or $2.62. A property assessed at $288,392 will see a $36.25 annual reduction, or $3.02 monthly. A property at $350,000 will see a $44 reduction, or $3.67 monthly. And finally, a $500,000 property will see a $62.85 reduction, or a $5.24 reduction monthly. The next slide will show the non-residential impact to education only. And once again, we use the same comparables. In the $750,000 property, we'll see a reduction of $280.20, or $23.35 monthly. The $1 million property will see a reduction of $373.60, or $31.13 monthly. And a property assessed, the average assessed property of $1,135,822 will see a $424.34 annual reduction, or $35.36 monthly. And a $1.5 million property will see a $560.40 reduction, or $46.70 monthly. The seamless education levy is a unique levy to the Lloydminster, and it enables schools from both sides of the border to offer the same curriculum. Driver training is one of those examples. The levy is remitted directly to the school divisions as it is collected, and the mill rate for the seamless education levy is 0.563 mils. The estimated change in the seamless levy, education levy is in 2020, it is expected to collect approximately $2.5 million, which is approximately $78,000 more than previously collected in 2019. Municipal and education levies. This slide shows the breakdown of percentages. Education levies make up approximately 30% of total taxes at $15,117,744, with the remaining being municipal levies at $35,958,439, which is 70% of our taxation levy. The total mill rate change is minus 0.4022 mils, or a 4.06 decrease in the overall rate. I know that we have a 4-year proposed change, but I'd just like to draw council's attention from the 2019 rates to the 2020 proposed rates. And then 2019 for municipal levy, you'll see that the levy was, as I previously stated, 6.5910 mils, and the proposed rate is a reduction to 6.3165 mils. Municipal non-levy in 2019 was 11.8372 mils, and we're proposing a reduction to 11.3698 mils in 2020. The seamless education levy remains unchanged at 0.5630 mils, and the education levy residence in 2019 was 2.7022 mils, and it's reduced in the 2020 proposed budget to 2.5765 mils. The education non-residential in 2019 was 3.8790 mils, and the proposed 2020 is a reduction to 3.5054 mils. Commercial mill rate factor is unchanged at 1.8, and the total residential mill in 2019 was 9.8562, and in 2020 the proposed rate is 9.4560. The total commercial was 16.2792 in 2019, and is proposed to be reduced to 15.4382 mils in 2020. The next slide will show the total impact of those mill rate changes. And once again, the same comparable properties. Residential property at $250,000 will see a reduction of approximately $100.05 monthly, or $8.34, or sorry, $100.05 annually, with an $8.34 monthly reduction. The residential property averaged at $288,392 will see $115.41 reduction, or $9.62 monthly reduction. Property at $350,000 will see a $140.07 annual reduction, or an $11.67 monthly reduction. And finally, a $500,000 comparable property would see a $200.10 monthly reduction, or annual reduction, with a $16.68 annual reduction. When we look at the non-residential impact with the total, we see that a $750,000 property will see a $630.75 annual reduction, or a $52.56 monthly reduction. Total levy for a $1 million property will be reduced annually by $841, or $70.08 monthly. And a $1,135,822 property, or the average property, would see a reduction of $955.23 annually, or $79.60 monthly. And finally, a $1.5 million property will see a $1,261.50 reduction annually, or a $105.13 monthly reduction. Some of the key dates as we move forward is the RFD to council, which is today, for the first reading of the mill rate bylaw. We have received the order in council approving the education rates at this point. The RFD to the special council meeting on May 11th for the second and third readings of the bylaw. And if those are passed, the property tax notices would be mailed before May 30th, 2020, but hopefully the mail in the third week of May. Property taxes are due upon mailing, but penalties do not begin until November 10th, 2020, as per the council's relief program. Thank you for your time. I will do my best to answer any questions, and I also have the chief assessor should I require his assessment. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, City Clerk. Questions or comments from council? Councilor Diachak.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the presentation, and I'm pleased to see which way the numbers are moving. I guess I wanted to speak to the education levy in Lloydminster and the seamless levy. Pardon me. I was involved in the development of it and sort of building the case for it, and recognizing that there was, obviously differences in programs were available by each province, and rather than parents having to choose where they lived and where they sent their kids to school, they would access those programs anywhere across the city in a seamless way. One of the assumptions we had going when we built this levy was that an indicator of city growth was the growth of assessment in the city. And I think now that I look at this model, there was a flaw in this thinking, because as we look at our growth in assessment, I would suggest that while our assessment has grown because of a different model and probably a much more detailed approach to this process, we've actually seen an increase in assessment. And I would suspect that student growth has not, had the same parallel in growth to the extent our assessment does. And I believe this is something that should be brought to the attention of the two school divisions, because certainly the intent wasn't to simply continue to get more and more money, but it was to get more money based on increased enrollments. And there was the connection that we made. And I believe that's a flaw in this process and the levy as exists. And I think it's something that needs to be addressed going forward.
Thank you, Councillor. And having your expertise on the other side, we'll look forward to leaning on you as we work through this process, if that's the wish of council, and work with administration on this.
I'll wear my red jacket.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Councillor Baker.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I appreciate whoever forwarded this agreement between the school division and the city. And it's interesting, under levy amounts, item number 5, there's a 1-year notice factor in there if you wish to cancel. So we talked about that a couple of weeks ago or so, and we weren't sure. So if you wanted to use that as an opening and then renegotiate, you could. Or you could say no, I guess. But thanks for whoever did this. This is good.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions or comments on the mill rate and taxable assessment bylaw? Counselor Torreson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just more so a comment more than anything, just that, as we move forward and make a decision on this today and do first reading, this really is the activity that ties everything together, that affects every, resident and business's pocketbook from a, municipal perspective. We go through the budget process, and we just went through again, just doing an update to that budget based on new information that we have partway through the year. And we've got all the assessment handy, and the assessment really is telling us how to divvy up those pieces of the pie so that there's a fair distribution of the costs to run the city. The only thing is, it's a little bit tricky with this one is it's both a good and bad thing, is that, we moved assessment in-house so that because we believed that we could do a good job of finding more assessment, and having the expertise in-house would be, useful to have. But they were almost too good at what they do in a way, because they found a lot more assessment, which is great. But, whether or not that affects any particular group disproportionately is kind of where the challenge comes in. So as much as we're showing through this presentation that there's, decreases here and there for across the board for, lower assessment plus lower mill rates, that's not necessarily the case for everyone, and just make sure that everyone's keeping an eye on their tax notices. Although, really you should have been keeping an eye on your assessment, because that's the way the process works. You don't change taxes after the fact. It's all about, getting that assessment, and if you have a challenge, you have to get it in before a certain date. But I guess part of it is it's good and bad. One is that we're finding the missing assessment that maybe we ought to have had in the past, so that we can ensure that there's a fair distribution, and that the piece of the pie of the overall city budget is fairly distributed amongst all the different parties. The other side being that sometimes there's sticker shock if something was missed, and you're not expecting that kind of increase. And in a way, it couldn't happen at a worse time. There's never a good time for an increase, but when we're in the scenario where we are, where businesses could be closing down, or they're having a harder and harder time to make ends meet, and having to deal with the very stark realities of the economic downturn that we're in, it sucks. And I totally understand and agree. But I also I think that the process more or less works in that, we're identifying the pieces of the pie and how it needs to be distributed, and that, the budget sets out how much money the city needs as a whole. And anything beyond that, we do have some political control, and we have some say in whether or not we want to change the mill rate factor from 1.8 to some other number that we believe is fair. I don't agree that that's fair at this time to make that adjustment. I think that we should roll on with where we're at. But, I do think that, the comments I've heard from Councillor Baker in the past on this, they have a lot of validity. I do agree. But at the same time, I don't think it should necessarily change. It won't change my decision making today as to what I choose to do regarding the mill rates. So I think that we roll on, and we provided everyone the change in assessment, and they had ample opportunity to get that changed with the city, or not get it changed, but to get feedback on what has changed within their assessment. So I think that we roll on, and really at the end of the day, we're giving taxpayers additional time based on the COVID scenario that we're in, that we can they can make the adjustments as they need to through their budget, and hopefully everyone is able to pay their fair share, and we don't run into too many hiccups through the process. It's a weird time to be alive right now, weird time to be in government, and it's a weird time to work in a business, and there's a lot of things that change every day, and it makes it a big challenge to budget, and it makes it a big challenge to to balance the books in the short term. But hopefully, using the tools we have in our toolbox, we were able to give people the time and flexibility to be able to, catch up on their fees in terms of their use of the city programs and services and all the benefits that the city provides to them. And hopefully it works out best for everyone. But, from what I can see in this presentation, most people will be, they'll be a little bit more flush with cash from things decreasing for them, but there's going to be a handful where things are increasing, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't feel good, but in the long run, it is a fair distribution of the fees in order to run our city. So that's all I had to say. End of the day, I'm in favor of moving forward and getting through the process so that we can help everyone start budgeting for their amount that's going to be due here as of May 30th, and then hopefully making a plan to get caught up before the November 10th deadline or earlier if they can. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Comments or questions from council? Councillor Thorson, I'll go ahead, Councillor Monroe.
No, it's good.
Okay. I think that this is we've gone through this as a council. This is our fourth, I believe, now year to do this process, and it's been quite interesting because as Councillors Baker and Torres and both mentioned, it starts with the assessment process. And actually before that, and I know it's Councillor Baker's talked about this extensively, we started the budget and how can we get a budget before we know what it's going to cost, and that someone way before us set up the system that we now live with today. And then I moved to the assessment process. So we have the budget process, and we try to arrive at where we're going to deliver services for the community starting at the beginning of the year, January 1st. Then we move into the assessment process where our assessors work throughout a year, assess it based, and in this case, the assessment value, to remind the taxpayers, is based in 2019. Even though your taxes come in 2020, it's based on the 2019 value. We brought assessment in-house to work to ensure better quality, I believe, customer service, which we had heard from the community quite loud and clear that they wanted a different approach. Again, this goes back to the assessment process, and I look to the chief assessor. I understand this process that we've been using, not the exact process, but dates back to England when the king assessed the value of taxes on the subjects of the day. And since then, property has been assessed moving forward and creating a property tax. And today we still have an imperfect system, but it is a system that we use because we have taxation people, assessors that have guidelines and rules and standards they follow. But we also give the opportunity to the taxpayer to appeal that assessment. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, City Clerk or Chief Assessor, that deadline is today, the end of business today. If someone is not happy with their assessment, they can still appeal it by the end of business today at the city. And I'll look to, not sure, I guess it'd be the City Chief Assessor, if he's there.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that's correct. It's actually until midnight tonight.
Thank you very much. So I think that is a critical piece to this puzzle, because we've dealt with a budget already earlier today. Now we've talking about the mill rate at the end of the day that brings it all together, from starting back with the budget, then moving to the assessment process, arriving at the mill rate. And I know, Councillor Baker, I can see you from my looking in the screen. I know this is going to take another king maybe to change this system, because this has been in a long way, and I don't know what the answer is. Ideally, I will share. Maybe the ideal was that if you could work with a year's previous taxes, you'd always be a year ahead. As a municipality, we haven't been that lucky. We didn't have that many savings that we could actually collect this year's taxes and work with last year's money. I would hope that would be a dream, that someday someone might be able to get to that, but that's not the way the system's set up. It's just, we're at an extremely challenging time. No one saw COVID coming. The economic uncertainty that goes with our oil and gas industry, which is a fundamental backbone of our community, has just left nothing but flags up all over the place and concern. But at the same time, this is that step that we have to take somewhere along lines as the elected officials. And I hope people to fully understand that this is walked through a number of different steps. And if you have an assessment issue, as I mentioned, please take it up with our assessment team. You have till midnight tonight to launch a request to have your assessment looked at if you haven't already. And I believe there's been some, and they will go through due process. But the process we're at today is we have to determine how we're going to pay for the services that our city is looking at paying for on an annual basis. So as Councillor Thorson said, I too will support this first reading to move this process forward, because it is something that is required. It's never easy. It doesn't get any easier. We've been through this now 4 times, as I say, and it hasn't got any easier. And the challenges continue to pile up, yet the services and the costs that our city incurs continue to rise. So I appreciate the work again done to the budget. Any other comments? I'll leave it to the floor of the council. Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I just wanted to add a few more things, because this item comes up once a year. So, just some of the other things I've been thinking about over the past year in terms of, the one tool we have in our toolbox, essentially this, and, a handful of other fees and utilities, business licenses. There's really not much that a municipality has access to in terms of funding. When you think about your average resident or taxpayer, you've got the sales tax on different goods that you purchase. You've got personal tax on payroll, or maybe you've got a business and you have income tax you pay on your business, or corporate tax. When you look at all those different tools in the toolbox and you think about where you were 10 or 15 years ago, your average person sees growth in their wage over a 10 or 15 year period. Even though you can stay within the same kind of marginal bracket, still every year after year, you get a 15 cent, 50 cent, $10 increase, whatever the case is. You're paying more and more on an annual basis. And it's kind of a funny system with property taxes, because traditionally in other years, we have increase in costs on an annual basis, and you end up having to increase the mill rate, or you have increased assessment to go with it. You don't necessarily have to increase the mill rate because of the inverse relationship of the two. But still, year after year, things cost more, and there's more taxes requested of you based on inflation and other things increasing. It's just a funny one with property taxes, because it's so in your face. Whereas personal taxes or corporate taxes, if you see wage growth or income growth, you don't necessarily see a change in percentage on it every year. But for whatever reason, property taxes is one where you just see the number and you feel it because you're living in the same house or something along those lines. So it's kind of just a funny tax. So I'm kind of just ranting and raving at this point. But one other thing I was just going to say is, in my time on council, I always believed that it's best not to create peaks and valleys when you don't have to. And I know a few years ago, we did create a peak to make an adjustment for, several of the financial issues our city was going through, whether that was supporting property taxes with utility revenues, or whether that was supporting taxes with land sales. And having to make those adjustments, it was a challenge, and created a big peak. And right now, what we're doing, and for the best reasons, because I agree that we have to make some adjustments because of the economic realities we're in, and with this COVID period and everything, that we have to make an adjustment. And this is going to create a valley in a sense. And my concern is that, is going to be continuing on to future years, and whoever is sitting on the next council, is that you're going to create a peak in a future year. But we're making this adjustment for the best of reasons, and I agree that we ought to do it. But the concern is that next year you create a peak because you've created a valley this year. So you don't have a smooth transition from year to year. So just something for everyone to be acknowledging. And unless there's substantial changes to next year's budget, it should in all cases, create some sort of a peak in people's finances, because things are going to be back to normal. Things are going to be open for the whole year. The capital budget potentially will look like other years have. So anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, just 2 quick points. One is that I think, one of the concerns that we saw these sharp increases in taxation, the question is can we ease the taxation over a couple of years? And the answer is no. It's no more than we can say, geez, your assessment's gone down. We can't ease that assessment down over a period of time. It is what it is. And the law says you have to deal with that assessed value in the year that you assess it. There's no way of easing it in or out or transitioning it. So that's part of the challenge in terms of the process that we use. The other part, sort of just to add to what Councillor Thorson is saying, is that we are headed into very difficult times. Provincial budgets and federal budgets continue to download to us responsibilities that with no increased taxation dollars to support those responsibilities. And I would suggest that the level of debt that's being incurred at the provincial level and the federal level is going to continue this trend in a way that it is going to make it even more difficult for us going forward. So as we look at this, we look at our assessment model and we look at the belt tightening that we're having to do in terms of the actual projects we do, finding the right balance and taxation and maintaining the city in a position where people see it as a place they want to live, build their family, grow a business. It is going to be more challenging going forward. And I think it's all that much more important to have all those pieces in place relative to how we assess, all the mechanisms that are in place, but also to address some of the pieces that we talked about here throughout these discussions. Because we're in for another 3 or 4 years of rough rides before even provinces and the federal government are in a position where they get close, remotely close to a balanced budget.
Thank you, Councillor Diachuk. Councillor Baker.
Well, Your Worship, I appreciate all the comments from my colleagues. But I got to remind them, and I've said it 3 times today, there's nothing wrong with the tax system. There's nothing wrong with your tax roll. It's about some properties that took big spikes in assessment. That's what it's about with me. And I've said it 3 times today.
Yep.
And the graphs as our administration, excuse me, have showed us today, I mean, they all look good. But it doesn't highlight the 50 properties that really got nailed.
Yep.
And those are the questions that I have. It's not about whether my taxes on my house went down $20 or $5 or here it is, or went up $20. It's about the large assessment increases and the charts. You look at the charts we're presented today. What can we do about those assessments? And I've never seen a report. I know there's little notations why something went up, but some of those buildings really went up. Then we heard that there was mistakes made. And those are the things I'm talking about. I'm not talking about what we're doing with 99%, well, 95% of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's the various increases in assessments, especially in some of those commercial properties. And I can't figure it out because I can take you for a drive and you don't have to. I can tell you, there are a ton of buildings in the city that are empty. And how the assessment goes up, I really don't know, because I'm not an assessor and I'm not criticizing the assessor, just saying, how in the world did that assessment jump 20% or 30% when everything else is going down? That's what I'm asking about, nothing else. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. To answer your question, and I'm not sure if I can, I know that our assessment team has reached out, and again, that's why I wanted to confirm the date of when appeals could be, because if someone is questioning their assessment, and no matter who it is, residential or commercial, they need to reach out to our assessment team and have those conversations to start the process. And there is a formal process that is arm's length from us, which I think is the best system. Because, and like I say, I don't know if there's no answer that in particular. It's on an individual basis based what I've learned about the assessment process. So I'm hoping those people will have reached out to our assessment team, made contact, and let the assessment team follow up those inquiries that you and I and other council members have received.
Thank you, Your Worship.
You're welcome. Any other comments or questions? Not seeing any, I will look for council's direction on 6.4.2 bylaw 18-2020. Councillor Fagnan. We'll get you turned on there and
I got it. That council grant first reading to bylaw number 18-2020, mill rate and taxable assessment bylaw.
thank you, Counselor. Looking for a seconder from council. Counselor Diachuk. I will ask, is there any further questions on the bylaw being proposed? Not seeing any. I'll ask for all in favor to raise their hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed, carried. Thank you very much, council and administration. Moving forward to 6.4.3, city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 6.4.3, bylaw number 19-2020, Larson Grove MDP amendment, I'll ask Natasha from planning to present.
Good afternoon, Natasha. We'll get you turned on there momentarily. There you are.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to note that with the support of ELT, the next two bylaws presented were not brought forward to GPC. It was determined that bringing forward the bylaws for first reading would provide council the opportunity to discuss the application in a more timely manner and not delay the process for the applicant. With that being said, I'm here to ask council to grant first reading to bylaw 19-2020, being a bylaw to amend map 2 future land use concept within the MDP from residential to commercial. In addition to this application, the applicant has also applied for a land use bylaw amendment from single detached residential R1 to direct control 1, DC1. And with that land use bylaw amendment, an amendment to the MDP was also required. This application was received in April of this year. The amendment to the MDP is from residential to commercial. The intent of the application is to reutilize an existing single detached residential dwelling as an office. The applicant has stated that the office would be used by an insurance broker at this time. An amendment is also, the amendment to the land use bylaw is being brought forward in the subsequent bylaw, bylaw 17-2020. The 21-day referral period was initiated and ended on April 24th. Referrals were circulated to adjacent landowners, external agencies, and internal departments. No comments were received pertaining to the MDP amendment. There were comments received in regards to the land use bylaw amendment and will be addressed accordingly. The subject property is located adjacent to commercial lands to the west and south and residential lands to the north and east. Additionally, this site falls within the downtown transition zone. The intent of this zone is to create a mixed-use downtown transition zone, which encourages additional retail and higher density residential developments to be located within close proximity of the downtown, facilitating the outward growth of the downtown core. It is in the opinion of administration that this application aligns with the intent of the downtown transition zone and will continue to facilitate the outward growth of that area. By council granting first reading to bylaw 19-2020, we will provide an opportunity for those to be affected by the application to address council during a public hearing. Public hearings are required by the Municipal Government Act as part of the adoption or amendment process of statutory plans. Bylaw number 19-2020 and bylaw 17-2020 must be approved concurrently. Following the approval of the identified bylaws, the applicant will be required to obtain a DP prior to any development occurring. Back to you, Your Worship, for questions.
Thank you, Natasha. Questions or comments from council? Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm familiar with that site, and I was just wondering, I'm not sure where the best place to bring this up. In terms of parking on 36th Street, right on that corner, if that's a place of business, the drive in front of a 7-Eleven comes out from the south, and that's a pretty congested corner. I just wondered if that is being considered in the whole approval process, whether there's going to be no parking signs put up there or what's going to happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Natasha?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Parking will be addressed at the stage of the land use bylaw amendment, and the applicant will be required to comply with all off-street parking regulations of the bylaw.
Good. Just a tough corner.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Certainly, there would be an opportunity, there has been an opportunity for the adjacent landowners, Natasha, I understand, to comment, but this would bring it out further in the community to, in essence, encourage further questioning or comments from people, I believe, by taking it to the public hearing.
Correct. Yes, at this time, we only send to directly adjacent landowners, but the public hearing is open to all residents of the city.
Terrific. Any further questions or comments?
Yeah.
Councilor Datchuk.
Yeah, just a quick question. So the way it's being positioned there, it's basically, it's a block long that we're looking at along that, whatever that avenue is that runs parallel to Highway 17. So how many properties or lots would there be there? Or is it just one, or am I reading it wrong?
This application only pertains to the corner site, which is addressed as 4910 36th Street.
Okay. Okay, yeah, just the way it looks there, it looks like there's another street on the
There
north
is a
side
back
of it.
alley, I believe, on the north side. Is
Yeah,
that
Correct.
okay.
correct?
All right,
Yeah, it's
that
one
makes
of the-
sense now.
Any other questions from council? Not seeing any, I'll look for direction on 6.4.3 bylaw 19-2020, the Larson Grove Municipal Development Plan Amendment. Councilor Datchuk.
I move that council grant first reading to bylaw number 19-2020, being a bylaw to amend all of lot 16, block 5, plan number 66B 03398 within the northeast quarter section, 34, township 49, range 2-8, west of the 3rd meridian on map 2, future land use concept, and the municipal development plan bylaw number 01-2013, from the residential to commercial, and that the council establish a public hearing to be held during the regular council meeting on May 25th, 2020, 2 p.m.
Thank you, Councilor. Seconder? Councilor Baker, thank you very much. Is there any further discussion on the bylaw as presented? Not seeing any. All in favor, please raise your arm.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed, and it's carried. Thank you. Natasha, back to you, I believe, for 6.4.2 to continue on.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm here to ask council to grant first reading to bylaw number 17-2020, being a bylaw to amend land use map being part 4 of bylaw 5-2016 from single detached residential district R1 to direct control 1 district DC1. Currently, the city is in the process of considering the map amendment that was previously discussed to the MDP and this proposal to the land use bylaw. This proposed amendment is a result of an application submitted on April 1st, which ultimately seeks to allow the reuse of a single detached dwelling located at 4910 36th Street, Lloydminster, Saskatchewan, as an office. The initial application requested that the lands described above to be redistricted from a single detached residential R1 to C1 Central Commercial District. The following conversation is focused more on the land use bylaw amendment here. The subject lands are bordered by single detached residential R1 to the north and east, central commercial C1 to the west, and highway corridor commercial and single detached residential to the south. As stated, these lands fall within the downtown transition zone as identified within our MDP. Administration initiated the 21-day referral period, which has since closed. During the referral period, one comment was received by an adjacent landowner who expressed opposition to the proposed amendments. Their concerns surrounded the impact of parking within a predominantly residential neighborhood. As I previously mentioned, should this amendment be approved and a DP is issued, the applicant will be required to provide off-street parking consistent with all the regulations within the land use bylaw. Lastly, upon review of the application submitted, Planning Administration identified some potential concerns with this map amendment. The applicant applied to amend this to C1 district, which includes a wide range of permitted commercial uses, and many of which could be seen as incompatible with adjacent residential properties, such as restaurants and lounges. In addition to this, the C1 district does not include a minimum setback or a maximum site coverage, which could result in the built form of future development being incompatible with existing structures. The current district, which is R1, requires a minimum of 6 meters and 1.2 meter front and side yard setback. It should be noted that if a development permit is submitted and it meets all the requirements of the land use bylaw, it must be approved. Therefore, care should be taken when lands are redistricted to C1, particularly when they're directly adjacent to other districts. As the C1 district poses a certain level of risk to the city and adjacent landowners, administration began to review alternative districts that could be utilized to allow for the development of other uses while mitigating risk to the city and adjacent landowners. Initially, administration reviewed the medium density residential district, R4. A listed discretionary use within this district allows for the conversion of a single detached dwelling to an office. This use class would accomplish the immediate needs of the applicant, however, would restrict any future development to the parcel. Additionally, should the existing structures no longer exist on the site, based on the existing site size and requirements of the R4 district, no development permit would be able to be approved, and therefore, in essence, leaving this site undevelopable. The only way, if it was R4, that more development could occur would be with an additional amendment to the land use bylaw. Finally, administration identified the DC1 direct control district as an alternative option for the applicant, which also supports his intended use at this time. The purpose of the DC1 district is to accommodate higher density residential, office, and multi-purpose commercial uses, such that by limiting a range of specific land uses and establishing sensitive site development regulation impacts on abutting properties are minimized. Like the C1 district, the DC1 district allows for offices as a discretionary use. However, since it is direct control, council will have the opportunity to place development standards on proposed development on a case-by-case basis in order to minimize land use conflicts between adjacent properties. Therefore, appropriate parking and setback requirements can be determined by council. This practice will also minimize risk of incompatible developments occurring in the future on this parcel. DC1 will allow for a wide range of commercial uses to be applied for to council and provide for a range of residential uses as well. However, council's approval will be required every time they propose a change in land use. Again, mitigating land use conflicts between the adjacent properties. Upon this conclusion, administration reached out to the applicant to discuss concerns around the initial application. The applicant was receptive of the concerns and as well as the concerns brought forward from adjacent landowners. With that being said, the applicant willingly amended his application to apply to redistrict this parcel from R1 to DC1. Planning administration was supportive of this direction. Again, similar to the previous bylaw, by granting first reading to bylaw 17/2020, those affected by this application will be able to address City Council during a future public hearing. Bylaw 19/2020 and 17/2020 must be approved concurrently. Back to you, Your Worship, for questions.
Thank you, Natasha. Questions or comments? The one comment I would like to make, Natasha, I'd like to thank administration for working with the applicant and working through the various scenarios, because as we know, planning it can be a very interesting piece of the puzzle in ensuring that we don't make a poor decision on the planning perspective. And I think the DC1, it's not my favorite, but at least it gives us an opportunity to work with proposed development and ensure that that development has the potential to go forward with minimum disturbance in the neighborhood. And I think I appreciate that. And we've had other DC1s that come back to council and wondered why, but I can see where DC1 has a very good fit in it. Something like this where you're trying to adjust to the times and the application, and someone sees an opportunity and trying to, again, blend residential, commercial in this case, and then a busy intersection, as Councillor Baker alluded to from the previous discussion. I certainly would like to hear from the community to see what they think, and I would have to support this for sure, because I do appreciate the work you've done on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Any other comments? If there is none, I will look for direction from council on 6.4.2 bylaw number 17-2020, the Larson Grove Land Use Bylaw Amendment. Councillor Diachak.
All right. Pardon me. Move that council grant first reading to bylaw number 17-2020, being a bylaw to amend all of lot 16, block 5, plan number 66B 03398 within the northeast quarter section 34, township 49, range 28, west of the 3rd meridian on land use map, being part 4 of bylaw number 5-2016 from the single detached R1 residential district to direct control DC1 district, and the council establish a public hearing to be held during the regular council meeting on May 25th, 2020 at 2 p.m.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to look to Councillor Buckingham as the deputy mayor to step. I have to step out for a moment, so I'm turning it over to Councillor Buckingham for the meeting, and I will return, I hope, shortly. Sorry, Councillor Buckingham, I caught you off guard there, but I'm now making you, you'll look for a seconder, please. Thank you.
No, we have a seconder to Councillor Diachak's motion, please.
Good afternoon.
I can't see everybody, unfortunately.
yeah.
Councillor Monroe?
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? Okay, we'll call for the question. All those in favor?
Thank you, your deputy worship.
Carried. We'll move on to 6.4.5, bylaw number 13/2020.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. For 6.4.5 bylaw 13-2020 Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw, I'll ask Patrick Lancaster to present.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, Council. Administration, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Administration is seeking that Council grant second and third and final reading to bylaw number 1320, the Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw. The purpose of this bylaw is to repeal and replace the existing FCSS, Family and Community Support Services Advisory Committee bylaw. The advisory committee and committees of the structure have served the community for many years to assist council with the administration and allocation of grant fundings. The advisory committee has primarily worked to receive grant applications and provide recommendations to council for funds totaling over $500,000 per year, representing significant investment in the nonprofit sector in nonprofit jobs, community services, and recreation. When the FCSS Advisory Committee bylaw was approved in 2017, it laid the framework and the terms of reference for the formation of the committee, as well as the administration of the FCSS grant. In later years, the city approved an additional grant policy linking Saskatchewan lotteries. This was in 2018, so that the committee could also provide recommendations around Saskatchewan lotteries community grant program funding. This new bylaw for the Community Services Advisory Committee would allow the committee to basically be assigned grants based on whichever policies the city chooses to put in place to assign grants to them. So we have prepared, and I believe they're on the agenda later, a revised Lloydminster tobacco grant policy, an updated Saskatchewan lotteries policy, and an FCSS grant program policy. And the opportunity is there for the city to assign different grants depending on the needs of the community and the availability of grant funding to distribute. The changes that this bylaw captures from the previous Family and Community Support Services Advisory Committee is that it removes any specific content related to FCSS. That has been moved to a separate policy. It formalizes the appointment of a youth appointee. It changes the chairperson position to a member of the committee rather than a representative from administration. There are new clauses addressing code of conduct and conflict of interest. And there are changes to how staff positions are referenced in the document to avoid inconsistency with future organizational chart changes. So for example, the city manager is listed as the city's representation on the committee, and it is worded in such a way that the city manager can then delegate those duties to whomever he seems appropriate from our administration body. As was asked in previous council meetings, if the bylaw is granted second and third readings, we will need to be coming back at a future date to appoint our committee members, and we are working with our committee members on strategies around staggering some of their timelines so that we are not left with a significant number of committee members exiting all at the same time. I guess with that, I will turn things back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much. Is there any questions or comments for Patrick? No, we had some discussion during the GPC, and I appreciate Patrick bringing forward the information that you did just to update us from that GPC meeting to this point, and ensuring that we've got consistency with the committee and ensuring that they have the ability to provide great input to City Council on the recommendations that they'll make.
Your Worship, if I could get you to acknowledge the chair's pass back to you for the minutes.
Certainly, I would acknowledge that. Thank you very much. With that, I will look for direction from council on 6.4.5 bylaw number 13-2020 Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw, second reading.
I'll make the motion.
I actually have Councillor Buckingham. Thank you, Councillor Monroe. I'll get you for a seconder potentially. Councillor Buckingham.
Move the council grant second reading to bylaw number 13-2020, the Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw.
I'll look for a seconder.
Now I'm being stubborn.
Councillor Thorson, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. And I certainly appreciate that. From that perspective, I'll ask the question, is there any questions on bylaw second reading before I call for the question? Not seeing any. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And that is carried. Moving back, I look to Councillor Buckingham, if you may.
Sure. I move the council grant third and final reading to bylaw number 13-2020, the Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor Thorson, thank you. And with that, I'll ask the question, is there any further question or comment on the bylaw, the question on the bylaw right now? Not seeing any. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed, carried. Thank you. Moving on to 6.5 and 6.51 through the city manager and on to Patrick. Back to Patrick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Administration is seeking approval of policy number 551-03, the Lloydminster Tobacco Reduction Grant Policy, and the repeal of policy number 015-2017 Tobacco Reduction Grant Policy. I'll comment here that this is a little bit of a housekeeping issue in addition to an update to the policy itself. The numbering of the original Tobacco Reduction Grant Policy was under a previous system, and by repealing the previous policy and putting the new one in place, it cleans up some of our policy filing, is my understanding. So the new policy is essentially an update to the existing Lloydminster Tobacco Reduction Grant, which is a program by which the city collects funds from local businesses that sell tobacco products and flavored tobacco products and invests these funds in nonprofit organizations that are running initiatives to promote a healthy lifestyle and the reduction of tobacco consumption. There are a few updates within this policy. Terms and positions have been changed to reflect changes within the organizational chart, as is the case with the Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw. This policy also assigns the grant to the Community Service Advisory Committee bylaw, whereas in the past it was a committee made up of members of administration. This policy proposes that this work and these recommendations come from the Volunteer Advisory Committee, then be brought forward to council. There is also the addition, and these are additions that you'll see in several of the following policies. The addition of a clause regarding a no appeal process once the policy is approved by council. Sorry, once allocations are approved by council. Addition of a clause regarding the redistribution, reallocation of unused or return grant funds. And then specific to the tobacco reduction grant, some of the restrictions around purchase of food items, electronics were softened, and then in that way that the advisory committee that could then make determinations whether or not the expenditures were appropriate to the project, and then pass those recommendations on to council for approval. And I guess with that, I will turn things back to you, Your Worship, for questions.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I will look to council members for questions or comments regarding the tobacco reduction grant policy. Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just curious on the removal of the ineligible expenses as far as office equipment, furniture, computers, printers, laptops, that entire line. What the rationale is kind of behind that? Was that something that was a need within past applications that we're making an adjustment for because there's something specific related to it?
Thank you. Through to Your Worship, back to Councillor Thorson. The changes to the ineligible expenditures, we had received some inquiries about food in the past. They just were never approved in past applications or as a particular expense. And the thought process behind it, or the logic process behind it, was that the advisory committee would have more freedom then to determine if the ask came forward, if it would then be something that they wish to see approved or not. There wasn't a specific reason or request for the loosening of the restrictions around the software, just an opportunity to provide more flexibility in the grant.
Any further questions, Councillor Thorson? I see you're.
I'm just thinking. I'll let somebody else know.
Okay, Councillor Buckingham, followed by Councillor Diachuk. Councillor Buckingham. Nope, just bear with us. I think City Clerk.
There we go. Thank you, Your Worship. I think I would just add that this actually brings things closer in line with a lot of what the FCSS funding allows and doesn't allow. I think it kind of just ties everything together. There are allowable and ineligible expenses and things for this stuff, and I think it actually gets it all in line, so our policies are uniform across the board.
Thank you. Councillor Diachuk.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I guess the removal of office equipment and furniture, computers, printers, laptops, scanners, software, gaming systems, equipment as ineligible. So now all of these would be eligible expenses. And I guess part of the concern around this that I have, I guess, is that I would still hope there was some latitude to make some decisions around whether or not these pieces should be purchased. Delivery of programs may require some of these pieces, but if we're using these funds to begin to fire up an office and develop an office, that means those dollars aren't being spent in some way to engage people in the community. And striking the balance is important. And I'm just wondering, Patrick, what mechanism exists in there to make sure there's an eye on what that right balance is.
Patrick, we'll get you turned. There you are.
Thank you. And again, the intent here is that the advisory committee would have the ability to authorize what is specifically allowed for or approved, I guess, under the grant. So if the committee, and this has happened in the past with our Saskatchewan Lotteries grants and with our FCSS funds, where the committee has specified that there are specific elements of the budget that they are looking for to give approval to within the allocation. That can be transferred through and included as part of the funding agreement that's signed with the agency. So by lifting the restrictions, it does give us some flexibility. Say if a particular program does require we'll say a display stand be purchased or something that might have been considered not part of the existing project. There's then now flexibility where if the advisory committee determines that there is value to it, that can be built into the recommendation. However, it's not to say that if someone asks for to set up an office and value is not found in it, that the committee could or would not approve that. Or sorry, could or would approve that.
Yeah, I guess we're downloading a lot of discretionary authority to those bodies, I guess.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Torreson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to kind of build on that, those questions, I guess, and this is the part that I have difficulty with. As much as I totally trust the effort and value that the FCSS committee brings, because I think they do tremendous work, and totally thankful that we've got committed volunteers that are kind of picking and sorting through these applications to kind of allocate the funds that do exist. I guess I'm just struggling with it just based on who's included in the eligible grant funding, and then what some of what could be considered eligible expenses are. So if we're talking about a health region or a school or school division, and I understand and I trust that the FCSS committee would do the right thing, but if a school division's asking to buy computers, printers, or something like that, and it's like, well, those are education costs, those should be covered by the provincial government. I don't want to automatically download costs and expenses onto us for something that may be part of education or maybe part of public health that ought to be through the SHA or something along those lines. So, and I struggle with that, and especially because this is a tricky grant for me, because I've never really been in favor of this grant, because I truly don't believe that those who sell tobacco related products for the most part are doing it because they want people to smoke. It's just because if you're going to have a gas station, you need to provide the full suite of amenities and services of what you're able to sell. Otherwise, you won't be able to sell gas and treats and snacks. So I struggle with this in general. Sure, there's the handful of exclusively vape shops and things like that may be included in here. But the vast majority in terms of the volume of numbers are going to be gas stations, and they don't necessarily sell them because they want people to smoke. So I struggle with the idea that a gas station is paying for, because it's allowable within our system that it's paying for Sask Health Authority desk or office equipment for something that should be a provincial responsibility, and there's already a tax collected by the provincial government to be able to do that, or whether it falls under education. So I'm just saying, I understand that you want the option to be able to review these things, and you may not end up going with one, and I do trust what the FCSS is doing. It's just opening up that window for those things that, to me, in principle, I don't know that I necessarily agree with.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Baker. We'll get you turned on here momentarily. There you are, Councillor Baker.
Thank you. I guess when this tobacco reduction grant started, I had some real concerns because there was a fee for each business that sold cigarettes and tobacco products. You could be 100,000 square feet and you paid the same price as somebody with a little corner store. And I don't know if that still exists, but there didn't make any sense. And I talked to lots of little businesses that were really upset about that. And so I don't know where we're sitting on that part of it, but it was simply the $25,000 a year, a couple of meetings a year. And we're saying we got to buy, somebody's going to buy computers out of the money. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. I mean, for years, we just had a meeting in the city hall, maybe twice a year for an hour or 2 hours. And, surely to goodness, we can give them an old computer from the city. I've got one sitting in front of me here. And why would we go out and spend the program money on that kind of stuff when I don't even know how it's being promoted? Because I haven't seen any real results. But how's it being promoted? And if you only got $28,000, that money should be going towards programs. I really don't get this report at all in terms of, I don't know who decided they should have computers and all this stuff, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's just, it's not in the cards as far as I'm concerned. Thanks.
Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. This is we're not really debating the policy as it sits for the tobacco reduction grant. We're just debating what's going to happen with the committee. And I think that it does give a little bit of flexibility to the committee to approve things that need to be approved to further the actual overall goals of the tobacco reduction grant. But I can tell you, as a member of that committee, we have been fairly schooled in not allowing grant funds to go towards these purchases. However, having the ability to do that, so we're doing this policy, we're doing it all in one sitting, to have it come together so that in a one-off or a situation where it might require it, and we see we can do some good with it, it's a possibility. But I would strongly suggest that the committee as it sits today would be pretty lean, pretty strict on handing out those funds for something like that based on the things we haven't funded for those things in the past. So I think it just gives that flexibility within there, but I would be surprised if it was ever really used.
I appreciate what Councillor Buckingham's saying. Oh, Councillor Fagnan, we'll get you turned on there momentarily. Councillor Fagnan, please.
Yeah, no, I would echo strongly with Councillor Buckingham on that. I think that they would use it at their own discretion. I think it's a nice idea just to have that flexibility. If that rare situation ever occurred, they would have that opportunity to do so. But I don't think there'll be any abuse on that at all. And I like that that they do have that opportunity to utilize that if necessary.
Thank you, Councillor. And that's basically, I'm very much supportive of the last, both you and Councillor Buckingham's comments on that. My belief is that the intent would be, it's not the norm. This is not the new budgetary line of first item. And I see Patrick smiling here. Knowing the committee that I had the chance to sit with just once for one process through FCSS, they are very adamant about ensuring program delivery. And I think that we don't want to lose focus. What we're doing is simply giving them an opportunity in the toolbox if they need it. And the example, the one that comes to my mind would be either a laptop or a potential Surface or a device that would be sent out inquiring at the high school and kids comment like that. If that was what it was used, most of them have a cell phone, we could potentially build an app. And I think that's where gaming systems and things like that, it gives the ability, because as we're now meeting by council, by virtual meeting here today, again, and not the first time, this is where our technology and our youth are going, I'm afraid. They're way ahead of us. And you alluded to myself, Councillor Baker. I'm not even close to the game with some young folks that are 16 years old that can run circles around me on a computer. I'll be the first to admit that from that perspective. So I think it's quite trying to give them the options and having that ability, because I would hate to see a program come forward that requires a $500 technology application portion out of a $3,000 or $4,000, $5,000 application, but it's turned down because we can't fund it because it needs that technology piece. And it may be a software, it may be in the case of hardware. I think the statement is all encompassing, but the last thing I want to see, and again, as you've said it, several council members, that we don't want to be buying office desks and computers, but if there's that little piece they need, yet we lose a $6,000 grant application because we just can't fund it because that doesn't meet the qualifications. It's kind of that square peg in a round hole. And that's my concern by taking that out. If we don't include it now, it gives that committee that flexibility to use their best judgment. And at the end of the day, we remember that these recommendations come back to council for final approval. Councillor Thorson.
Yeah, I guess, thank you, Your Worship. What you said at the end, I think, is probably, for me, the most key, because part of me doesn't want to give the ability to purchase capital items on behalf of the provincial government for a fee that is ours. It's one thing if it's an FCSS fee, which is provincial money for, community support services. So part of me is like, if it's a provincial matter, that's fine if we're allocating a little bit to it. But because this is our fee, I disagree with it in principle. But at the end of the day, when it comes to council, we'll ask for that. I hope that when it comes to us, it identifies whether or not any of these items that I think are a little more, let's say, controversial, whether they're capital items or not going into it, that those are identified and we can debate those at the time as to whether or not we are self-downloading on ourselves with this fee for something that is, potentially should be paid for by the school divisions or should be paid for by the health authorities. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And that committee does have a council representative that will sit on that committee, so that will also fall to the council representative to ensure that the first time around that's always something in their mind that's going forward when those applications are reviewed. Councillor Baker. I'll just get you turned on here. And there you are, Councillor Baker.
Just for the record, the city does put 20% of the money in the pot for FCSS.
Yes, we do, Councillor Baker. So we do put in 20% of the total allocation to FCSS funding. I think what Councillor Thorson alluded to was where the province of Alberta does put a good portion towards it, but we do have money in it, and it's a joint program between the municipality and the federal provincial government.
Your Worship, just to clear it up, things like computers and things like they just kind of disappear.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And not accusing anybody of anything, they just disappear.
Nope, and that's why I agree with you. And I think that with the way technology is changing, and as I alluded to earlier on this, is it might be, I'd hate to lose something because we need to access X number of dollars for software, or potentially a surface if they were putting something out trying to collect data at a different point where we've done it as a city, and I'm sure the health unit's done it and other people. But when I like to not tie their hands too tight, because if they do, we can miss an awful good program. Okay. Yep. Any other questions or comments, council? All good? If not, I will look for direction from council on 6.5.1, policy number 551-03, the Lloydminster Tobacco Reduction Grant Policy. But before I ask for that, I'll look to the city clerk. Do we need two motions, city clerk, or can it be and, just the word and added?
In this case, we'll go with the two motions because we're repealing a policy, if we could, Your Worship.
Certainly, sounds good. I just wanted to be clear on that. So I will look for council's motion, Councillor Buckingham.
Move that council approve policy number 551-03, the Lloydminster Tobacco Reduction Grant Policy.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Fagnan. Any further discussion on that question? Not seeing any. I'll ask call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed, carried. Councillor Buckingham.
Move the council repeal policy number 015-2017, the Tobacco Reduction Grant Policy.
Thank you. Look for a seconder. Councillor Fagnan. Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. I'll call for the question. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed, carried. Moving on to 6.5.2, and through the city manager, back to you, Patrick. Get you turned on there. There we are.
Thank you, Your Worship. Administration is seeking approval of policy number 551-01, the Saskatchewan Lotteries Community Grant Policy. This is an update of the existing Saskatchewan community grant policy, which to, I guess, align with the new Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw. The changes to this policy are somewhat less significant compared to the previous policy the council just approved. In this case, the updates are limited to the changes in the terminology around staff positions that are mentioned. There is the new naming for the advisory committee that it's associated with, the clause regarding the appeals, that there are not appeals once council has approved grant allocations, and that there is a clause in there for the reallocation of funds that up to a certain point that are returned or unused by community organizations that receive an allocation. And I guess with that, I will turn it back to your worship for questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions or comments? Basically housekeeping is what I'm seeing. Is that pretty much the summary here, Patrick?
That is an accurate assessment, your worship.
Thank you. Any other questions, council? I'll look for direction from council on 6.5.2, policy number 551-01. Councilor Monroe.
Oh. That council approved policy number 551-01, Saskatchewan Lottery Community Grant Policy.
Thank you. Seconder, Councilor Buckingham. Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion presented? Not seeing any. I will call for the question. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, your worship.
Opposed, carried. And moving on to 6.5.3, one more time through the city manager to Patrick.
Thank you, your worship. Administration is seeking approval from council on policy number 551-04, the Family and Community Support Services Grant Policy. Administration has prepared a draft policy and is seeking approval. This policy essentially takes the content that was in the previous Family and Community Support Services bylaw that spoke to the grant and turns it into a policy, because the new Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw does not speak to a specific grant or lay out the framework for how the grants roll out, just the advisory committee itself. So this policy contains all the elements that we needed from the FCSS, from the previous bylaw to roll up the grant. Many of you are already familiar with FCSS in that it is a partnership with the provincial government with an 80-20 funding arrangement. The bylaw was, the regulations around the grant are subject to the FCSS Act and regulations that are put out by the province of Alberta. And the framework of the policy includes the distribution of the process that we follow for the grant, as well as our participation in the FCSS program with the province. With that, I will turn it back to your worship for questions.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Questions or comments? Not seeing any. I will look for direction from council on policy number 551-04, Family and Community Support Services Grant Policy. Councilor Monroe.
That the council approved policy number 551-04, Family and Community Support Services Grant Policy.
Thank you. Seconder, Councilor Fagnan. Thank you very much. I'll ask, is there any further questions or discussion on the motion at hand? Not seeing any. I'll call for the question. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, your worship.
Thank you. Opposed, carried. Thank you very much, Patrick. Much appreciated. You do some great work there with your team, and certainly our community is no stranger to the FCSS and all the work that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you, worship and council.
Moving on to operations 6.6. I'll look to the city manager for 6.6.1.
Thank you, Worship, to discuss 6.6.1, scheduling of public hearings for bylaw 11-2020 and bylaw 12-2020. I'll ask Natasha from planning to present.
There you are, Natasha. Thank you very much. Please go
Your
ahead.
Worship. We're here to ask council to establish public hearings to be held during the regular council meeting scheduled for May 25th, 2020 at 2 p.m. for bylaw number 11-2020 and bylaw number 12-2020. Public hearings are to be held before council adopts or amends any amendments to the land use bylaw or any other statutory documents. They are an opportunity to provide to the public to convey their views on proposed amendments. In an expanded effort to curb the spread of COVID-19, Council has implemented a series of temporary guidelines in order for ratepayers to participate in forums where they can share their views and opinions on matters that affect them. Public hearings are open to all members of the public. Those who believe they are affected by a proposed application may make a presentation or submit written comments to Council prior to the public hearing. Participants wishing to speak in favor or opposition to a proposed application will be able to participate in the regular council meeting via conference call or web conference meeting as per the public hearing procedure that was put in place due to the restrictions of the current COVID-19 situation. Bylaw number 11-2020, a land use bylaw amendment from medium density residential R4 district to row house residential R3 received first reading during the April 6, 2020 regular council meeting. Bylaw number 12-2020, a text amendment to the medium industrial I2 district received first reading during the April 20th regular council meeting. City administration is recommending that the public hearings for bylaw number 11-2020 and bylaw 12-2020 be held during the regular council meeting on May 25th, 2020 at 2 p.m. This will allow for time for administration to meet the advertising requirements of 2 consecutive weeks, with the last advertisement ending no sooner than 5 days prior to the public hearing. In these ads, we will provide additional information for the public as how they can connect with the Office of City Clerk to be allowed into these meetings. Those wishing to speak via conference call or Zoom must contact us prior to the public hearing to be provided conference bridge information. Lastly, they have the ability to submit written submissions 3 days prior to the public hearing. They must be signed and have their name, address, and phone number of who it was submitted by. Advertisements for these public hearings will be placed in the Meridian Source on May 7th, May 14th, and May 21st, 2020. Back to you, Your Worship, for questions.
Thank you, Natasha. Questions or comments, Council? As Natasha outlined, this is with COVID-19 and us meeting virtually, even though the public is able to see us and attend the meetings and take in the discussions, the ability for them to comment is limited. And since we don't know when and how we're going to move forward just yet, I think this is a great idea that with the policy and procedure that we discussed earlier today and approved, this gives us the opportunity to help move things forward at the city, because we cannot, we've got to make a decision on some things, but we have to follow the process. And this is the process that we need to follow, I believe, as it's outlined today. And we need to move to a public meeting and give people that opportunity to have their say if they'd like to discuss the issues at hand. Any other thoughts or comments? If not, I will look for council from council for direction on 6.61, the scheduling of public hearings, bylaw 11-2020 and bylaw 12-2020. Councillor Torreson.
Before I start, I just want to say I think it's a good idea. It's important that we're able to get that feedback and make sure that everyone has an opportunity to have their voice heard prior to a decision being made. And that's all part of the process that we follow. And, we got to roll with the punches as circumstances change. And I think that this is a, good and clever way to find different avenues to get people there. So with that, I'd like to move that council establish public hearings to be held during the regular council meeting scheduled for May 25th, 2020 at 2 p.m. for bylaw number 11-2020, land use bylaw 5-2016 amendment, medium density residential R4 district to row house residential R3 district, and bylaw number 12-2020, land use bylaw 5-2016 text amendment, medium industrial I2.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder? Councillor Monroe, thank you very much. Any further discussion or debate on the motion at hand? Not seeing any. I'll call for the question. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Opposed, carried. Moving on to number 7, Mayor and Council reports. I don't have a whole lot to report, and it's been a lot of conference calls, discussions. Last week's news in the community about the COVID cluster certainly drew a lot of attention, as well as the ceasing of our reopening plan that City Council had worked with towards following Saskatchewan's lead. From that perspective, we've seen an awful lot of discussion from the media and a lot of coverage. I will report to council and the public that I did hear from Premier Moe on Friday at lunch, as well as Premier Kenney Saturday morning. And both premiers were very supportive of our community and indicated that we are in their thoughts and prayers, but also to ensure that we get through this, and look forward to the community moving forward with the reopening plan as it works, working with the government of Saskatchewan, following the Chief Medical Health Officer, as well as Saskatchewan Health Authority, to ensure for our residents the safety and security, but also that first of all and foremost, followed by the need to try to start to reintegrate as best as we can following a plan. And again, I'll say this, as it's been said publicly, that no matter what plan we move forward with, when we move forward with a plan, that plan is always going to be fluid and adjusted accordingly based on what we see in the community, with safety as the paramount issue. So I can't report much more than that. Like I say, the challenges we face are across the provinces, across the country, and certainly around the world, but certainly the mayors of Alberta and Saskatchewan, we discuss on a weekly basis, if not twice a week, issues, and we're all facing similar challenges and working with what's been presented to us, but we're moving forward as best as we can. And for us, we'll just keep the community informed as best as we get informed by Saskatchewan Health Authority and the appropriate authorities. Any other comments from council members? If not, I will ask the question, is there any matters at this time that this council needs to deal with? Not seeing any, I'll look to inquiries from the media.
Thank you, Your Worship. And today we have interview requests for yourself, Mayor Gerald Albers.
Thank you very much, Eric. With that, I would ask for a recess of council.
Recess.
Motion to recess, seconded by Councillor Buckingham. Thank you. All in favor? Get that, City Clerk? All right, thank you very much. And we are recessed. Thank you very much, everyone.
So we're back in Teams.
Yes, we are.